Multiple inbound. Bearing 270. Speed Mach 2 plus. Range 200 miles. At exactly 4:17 hours, the radar aboard the USS Independence lit up with 31 inbound contacts. The crew had less than 2 minutes to react. 5 of those missiles broke through the fleet's defenses. 2 slammed into the American carrier itself. And what followed was chaos. Welcome to Naval Edge, Strategy, Firepower, History. Today, 5 Chinese missiles hit a U.S. carrier at dawn. The battle that followed. The South China Sea. A patchwork of reefs and shoals claimed by Beijing, Manila, Hanoi, and others, but dominated by China's military buildup. Satellite photos showed sprawling bases carved from coral, bristling with SAM batteries, anti-ship missiles, and fighter jets. Into this contested arena sailed the USS Independence, a Nimitz-class supercarrier displacing over 100,000 tons. She was the centerpiece of Carrier Strike Group 7, flanked by cruisers, destroyers, and a submarine screen beneath. Their mission was simple on paper: freedom of navigation operations. To demonstrate that international waters remain open despite Beijing's territorial claims. But to the crew, the atmosphere was anything but routine. Every day, Chinese destroyers shadowed the fleet. Drones lingered at radar range, probing, mapping. Sailors joked about the constant tail. But to officers on the bridge, every turn of the screws carried weight. The South China Sea was a tinderbox. And on that late August morning, before sunrise, the spark would come. At 4:10, in the Combat Information Center of the USS Arleigh Burke, Radar Officer LT, Commander Sarah Vasquez frowned at her console. Something was off. High-altitude drones, usually circling lazily, had shifted into deliberate formation, lining up along the edge of detection. Simultaneously, electronic warfare officers reported unusual pulses. Distant radars painting the carrier group with precision. It wasn't random. It was targeting data. Then came the chatter. Linguists monitoring radio intercepts coded Mandarin transmissions between Hainan Island and forward bases in the Spratlys. The tone was urgent. Vasquez keyed her mic. CIC to Fleet Command. Multiple anomalies. Recommend elevated alert. Aboard the Independence, Commander Blake, the watch officer in CIC, leaned over glowing tactical displays. Mark every contact. Prioritize unknowns. Move to Condition 2. But the enemy had already moved. From hidden silos on Fiery Cross Reef. From mobile launchers inland on Hainan. From a submarine lurking in the deep. 31 missiles erupted. Some arced high into the stratosphere. DF-21D ballistic missiles, infamous carrier killers, designed to plunge down at hypersonic speed. Others streaked low across the waves. YJ-18C skimming cruise missiles, flying just meters above the surface, hard to spot until too late. The CIC filled with voices. Inbound. Multiple. Bearing 270. Time to impact. 2 minutes. Klaxons wailed across the carrier. Red lights flashed. General quarters. Below decks, sailors rode out of bunks, pulling on flame-retarding gear. On the flight deck, handlers scrambled to chain down aircraft. In engineering, boiler crews shoved fuel to the reactors, bracing for impact. Every man and woman aboard knew this was no exercise. The escorts responded instantly. The USS Bunker Hill, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, launched a ripple of SM-6 interceptors. Fiery lances tore skyward, chasing ballistic arcs. Seconds later, destroyers Arleigh Burke and John Paul Jones joined in, their VLSLs vomiting missile after missile. The sky was alive with contrails and thunder. Interceptor away. Time to intercept. 23 seconds. Screens lit up with flashes as some enemy warheads were destroyed, but others split into decoys, confusing defenses. Some dove lower, skimming the sea. Aboard the Independence, Captain Henry Foster's voice boomed over the 1MC. All stations, brace for impact. Deploy decoys, CIWS to full auto. On the flanks, Phalanx Gatling guns spun up with a banshee scream, spitting tungsten rounds at 4,500 per minute. Ram launchers swiveled, unleashing short-range interceptors. The air was chaos, tracers arching, decoys splashing, explosions tearing the sky. But there were too many. At 4:19, AYJ-18 slammed into the USS Bunker Hill. The cruiser shuddered as fire erupted across her starboard side. Her power flickered, alarms screaming. Two more missiles evaded interceptors and closed on the carrier. One was shredded midder by CIWS fire. Another was spoofed by jamming, veering into the sea. But two got through. The first struck the forward flight deck, igniting a chain of F-18 Hornets into a rolling fireball. The second smashed into the island's superstructure, blowing apart radar arrays and hurling sailors off their feet. The world's most powerful warship was burning. The strike revealed the nightmare U.S. planners had long feared, the saturation attack. Carrier defenses are layered. Outer ring, SM-6 long-range interceptors. Middle ring, ESSM mid-range missiles. Inner ring, CIWS and ram point defense. In theory, no missile should get through. But China's tactic, combining high-altitude ballistic arcs with low-flying sea skimmers, forced Aegis to split attention. Each missile's trajectory had to be tracked, prioritized, engaged in seconds. The system worked, but not perfectly. Out of 31, only 5 penetrated. But in naval combat, 1 is enough. On the flight deck, chaos reigned. Petty Officer Marcus Lee dragged a wounded shipmate from a burning Hornet, flames reflecting in his visor. Aviation fuel spread in rivers of fire, explosions rocking the deck as ordnance cooked off. "Get those hoses on it!" screamed Damage Control Officer L.T. Harris, directing crews in silver fire suits. Foam sprayers roared as sailors fought to contain the inferno. Inside CIC, red lights flashed as radar feeds went dark. The island's superstructure was crippled, sensors offline. "Captain, SPY-1 radar is gone, switching to backup arrays." In the engine room, Chief Engineer Ramirez felt the shockwave rattle steel bulkheads. He barked, "Lock down all hatches. Maintain reactor output. We keep this ship alive or we die trying." Amid smoke and chaos, sailors clung to discipline. Training kicked in. Damage control parties sealed compartments. Medics triaged the wounded in corridors lit by flickering emergency lights. The Independence had been struck, but not sunk. Meanwhile, the battle spread. Destroyer USS John Paul Jones intercepted another wave, its crew cheering as SM-6 South knocked ballistic warheads out of the sky. Submarine USS Virginia, silent below, maneuvered to shadow the Chinese sub believed to have launched cruise missiles, preparing a counter-torpedo spread. Overhead, FA-18s launched from the carrier before catapults were disabled. Pilots roared into the sky, searching for enemy aircraft or drones guiding the strike. The South China Sea was now a battlefield. Allied radars in the Philippines and Japan picked up the chaos. In Washington, phones rang in the Pentagon. The question was immediate. Was this a warning strike or the start of war? Within hours, Chinese state media announced a defensive strike against a U.S. intrusion. Beijing claimed sovereignty, accusing Washington of provocation. In Washington, the National Security Council convened. The carrier had survived, but barely. Lives were lost. A cruiser crippled. Advisors debated, retaliate with force or contain escalation before it spiraled into global war. Allies watched closely. Tokyo raised readiness. Manila called for emergency UN meetings. Moscow, silent but listening. The missile strike had failed to sink a carrier, but it had achieved something else. It had proven America's invulnerability was no longer guaranteed. Naval history warned of such moments. In 1982, Argentina's Exocet missile sank the British destroyer Sheffield, shocking the Royal Navy. In 1991, during Desert Storm, an Iraqi Silkworm narrowly missed the battleship Missouri, only to be intercepted by HMS Gloucester. Every war reminds navies. Technology evolves, threats adapt. And now, in 2025, China had shown its ability to challenge the U.S. Navy head-on. What if the Independence had gone down? Over 5,000 sailors aboard, dozens of aircraft, billions in technology. The loss would rival Pearl Harbor, a single strike reshaping the world order. Allies might doubt U.S. protection. Rivals might test boundaries from the Baltic to the Gulf. Markets would crash. Diplomacy would burn. The missile barrage hadn't sunk a carrier, but it had sent a message. The age of uncontested American seas was ending. The fires aboard were eventually contained. The carrier limped east under escort, smoke trailing from her scarred island. The USS Bunker Hill, listing but afloat, was towed for emergency repairs. 10 sailors lost their lives, dozens wounded, but thousands were alive because training, courage, and sheer grit held the line. For the U.S. Navy, the lessons were sobering. Defense was strong, but not perfect. Future wars would test that margin again and again. The dawn strike on the USS Independence proved one truth: the seas are no longer safe. If you were in command that morning, what would you have done? Order a counterstrike? Or hold fire to avoid World War III? Comment below with your thoughts. And subscribe to Naval Edge for more naval war stories, battlefield breakdowns, and the strategies that shape our world.